BitChute and subscribe on Odyssey as well. Okay, the next question comes from from Yamascudo. What are the lasting effects of China's previous one-child policy? Well, the answer is there's a number of effects. One of them is that there's far too many working-class men. So there's just all these men that can't find women, and that have absolutely no hope of finding women, and so are just enforced incels. And what that it brings about, and this is noted in China, is violence. Intermale violence, and the areas of China which have in the countryside and whatever where people practice a one-child policy and they desperately want to have a boy to take on the farm or whatever, and so they abort girls or whatever it happens to be. There's this massive disproportionate high amount of men, and the result of that is intermale violence and crime and so on. And this is very, very conspicuous now in the areas of China where there are far too many men. And that is to be expected. The second thing that you get is just abduction of women. But this is also happening in India to a lesser extent because there's too many men there as well. Because for the same reason, the Indian desire in the countryside to have a son, and so you get the abduction of women and whatever. You also get these Chinese men foraying into Mongolia and other such places, trying to get women there, which is pissing off the Mongolians immensely. And so yeah, you look under the weather, Ed. Thank you. Oh, but still lovely. Oh, thank you. It was some backhanded compliment. I don't think I'm under the weather. No, I think I'm all right. And so it's having some terrible problems there. And of course, it renders the status of the female much higher and so on. And the female can be particularly picky. And the female is being particularly picky. We've got data on this from my Chinese colleague Ming Ru, and he's found that there's dysgenic fertility now among females in China. Even that it was predicted that the result of this would be somehow eugenic. Richard Lin predicted that the result of this would be eugenic because the females would select the high status men and the low status men would die off. But that is being countered by the dysphoria of women who are living a Western lifestyle and not marrying till it's too late and just don't want to have children and whatever. That's come to China, and so I'm afraid that this predicted. Ed needs a vlogger's ring light. Yes, I have a vlogger's ring light. Do that, silly me. Right, the next question comes from Jeff Jones, and he says, "Dear Dr. Dutton, given the mass slaughter of Russian soldiers in World War II and subsequent husband shortage that followed, given that the surviving men could only have the pick of the bunch with regard to the women folk, would this have a net eugenic or dysgenic effect on Russia today?" That's a very interesting question. I think that the answer, I don't know that they've done any research on if it's had a eugenic or dysgenic effect on Russia today. You need a better cam, TBH. What's wrong with the camera? Anyway, so is that it probably wouldn't have done much because we had a very, very similar situation in Britain. So the situation we had in Britain in World War One, after World War One, was that there was this massive excess of women because the 8% of the men that went out were killed, but it was 12% of the officers that were killed. And the officers tended to be disproportionately from the upper class and upper middle class. They tended to be from private schools, things like this. And so the result was this spinster crisis because you had far too many women. And the thing is, though, it's not like you think to yourself, okay, the men are going to come back and they're going to have the pick of the women. No, because a lot of these women do not want to marry down. They are genetically evolved women to not want to marry down. To want to indeed marry up, to marry hypergamously, to marry a person of a high social class. I need a backlight, someone's saying. Lipton had a backlight on Thursday. You were all moaning about it, so make your minds up. Anyway, so they didn't want to marry, well, even sideways, and they certainly didn't want to marry down. And so the result of that was they didn't marry at all. That women are evolved to be so disgusted by the concept of hypogamous marriage, that is to say, of marrying socially downwards, that they would rather not marry than than marry hypogamously. They want to marry hypergamously. And so I don't think it would have had that much of an effect at all. All it would have meant is that loads and loads of women wouldn't have married and had children, and similarly, lots of men wouldn't have married and had children and had children. Now, quite what the social dynamics of that would have been, I don't know, because I don't know how the Russian class system crossed over with how likely you were to be killed. In England, as I said, it would almost certainly have been dysgenic, because it would have been upper class men killed in the war, upper class women resigned from the gene pool because they don't want to marry down. So what was going on in Russia, I don't know the details of who was killed. So it's hard to say, but I suspect it would mean that it would be the more middle class women who would just not marry anybody. And they would, so in that sense, one might have predicted it would be dysgenic. So yeah, that's what I suspect. Right, the next question comes from academic